It would be a shame to start something with irreversible environmental impacts and then stop it because nobody's making money.
Hi, everybody. I'm Doug Barr, chairman of the St. Helena Forum for Innovation and Creativity. In our first interview on the subject of deep sea mining, we heard the perspective of the mining industry provided by the CEO of the metals company, Gerard Barron. Today, we'll hear the ocean's perspective provided by Dr. Lisa Levin. Dr. Levin is a distinguished professor at Scripps Institution of Oceanography. She was director of the Center for Marine Biodiversity and Conservation and Oliver Chair in Marine Biodiversity and Conservation from 2011 to 2017. Levin has participated in or was chief scientist on over 45 oceanographic expeditions around the world. Dr. Levin is an author or co-author of more than 275 scientific publications. She is currently an associate editor of Science Advances and has served as North American editor of the journal Marine Ecology. She is founding editorial board member of Annual Reviews of Marine Science, past contributing editor for Limnology and Oceanography and Marine Ecology Progress Series, and has edited 5 special volumes on aspects of deep sea biodiversity. Dr. Levin is founder and co-lead of the Deep-Ocean Stewardship Initiative, which seeks to integrate science, technology, policy, law, and economics to advise on ecosystems-based management of resource use in deep ocean and strategies to maintain the integrity of deep ocean ecosystems within and beyond national jurisdictions. She co-leads the DOSI Climate Working Group, bringing climate science to policymakers and raising awareness about climate change in the deep oceans. Levin is currently working to mainstream climate change considerations into management of deep sea mineral and fishery resources and into conservation of biodiversity. Levin was awarded the American Association of Limnology and Oceanography's Redfield Lifetime Achievement Award in 2018 and the Prince Albert I Grand Medal in Ocean Science in 2019. And now, let's welcome Dave Freed and Dr. Lisa Levin.
Doug, always a pleasure. Thank you. And Dr. Levin, it's an honor. Thank you for spending some time with us here on the forum today. As we all learned in elementary school, approximately 70% of the Earth's surface is covered by water. I read recently that something on the order, as of 2022, 80% of the oceans, especially the deep oceans, are essentially unexplored, or they remain unmapped, I should say. How well do we really know what's going on down there?
Not very well. I would say those numbers you gave are roughly accurate. I think the mapping percentages are up to 25% now because there's a big program, Seabed 2030, aimed at mapping the full ocean by 2030. But those are bathymetric maps. We don't have maps of the animal life or the ecosystems that are down there. And I'm a biologist. That's a lot of what I care about. So most of the species in the ocean, in the deep ocean, have yet to be described or even discovered. And even for the species we have found and described, we don't know very much about what they do, how they live. We know that information for a few of them, but not that many.
Has anyone attempted to quantify or speculate as to how many, potentially thousands of species, I'm assuming, of creatures that we just simply don't know or have never cataloged?
I think the number's in the millions. I don't remember the exact estimates. I think the upper estimates were 10 million, but those are probably on the high side for animals. If you count microbes, all bets are off. I don't know how many species of microbes there are in the ocean. And of course, in the deep ocean, there aren't any plants, what we call plants, that rely on photosynthesis because there's no sunlight.
Right. So this series of interviews that we're doing obviously involves the exploration of deep seabed mining. And the advocates of that effort assert that scooping up these nodules from the ocean floor is essential to the advancement of technology and to the betterment of humanity. I hate to put you on the spot so early in our conversation, but to what extent do you agree or disagree with that belief?
Well, it's taken me a while of looking into this and thinking about it and watching things change over the last decade. But I currently don't believe that deep seabed mining makes any sense. Really, in terms of not just the environmental damage, which would be severe and permanent, pretty permanent, but in terms of the need for the resources, because electric car battery technology is changing. The cobalt, nickel, and copper, which cobalt and nickel are the basis of many of the electric car batteries produced in the United States, but the primary car maker in China doesn't use that technology. They have 30% of the world market, and they use, I think, iron phosphate batteries. And it's estimated they'll have 40% of the world market by 2030. And basically, battery technology is changing. At the same time, we're learning to recycle and reuse and even redesign our products so that we can recycle rare metals more easily. So I think the projected demands for 10 years from now, which were huge increases from the present, I don't think they're going to come to be. I think that some of the other arguments, which were to replace land mining, which has a lot of social problems and also environmental problems, I don't think those arguments hold up, because deep seabed mining will never replace land mining. It will be in addition to land mining. So we're not going to solve the land mining problem, but I do know that it's getting better. It's much better than it used to be in terms of ethical and moral issues surrounding it. And let's see, there's a couple other. I mean, economically, deep seabed mining would glut the market and the prices will go down, and it may not be economically viable to mine in the deep seabed also. It's very remote. It's very expensive to do that mining, and it would be a shame to start something with irreversible environmental impacts and then stop it because nobody's making money.
Could you walk us through a little more in detail what those environmental impacts might look like if in fact if this widespread deep seabed mining was approved and initiated? What would that look like in terms of the ecosystem and the species that are down there?
Well, first, it's important to realize the deep sea is not one ecosystem. There are many different types, and 3 types are targeted for minerals mining. One are the abyssal plains with these potato-sized polymetallic nodules. That occurs at great depths of 3,500 to 5,000 meters. Another type of habitat are hydrothermal vents, and these have massive sulfides, also rich in metals and gold and silver. And they're small patches on mid-ocean ridges and some back arc basins. They're very small sized habitats in area with lots of endemic and highly specialized species that live off chemosynthesis rather than photosynthesis. And then the third type of habitat targeted internationally for seabed mining are ferromanganese crusts, or cobalt-rich ferromanganese crusts that form on seamounts. And seamounts have dense aggregations of corals and sponges, and also fisheries like there are deep sea fisheries that are targeted on seamounts. So what mining does in all cases is remove the substrate on which many animals live, not the fish, they don't live on them, but the invertebrates. Many are sessile, meaning they don't move around. They attach and then they might live there, and they can live to be, in some cases, thousands of years old. So once the damage is done, once they're flattened or their substrate is removed, it takes many, many generations in people time to recover. We don't actually know how long it would take, but there have been experiments, for example, in the nodule areas with some simulated mining that show after 30 years the ecosystem hasn't recovered, even the microbes, and their functions haven't recovered. So our interpretation is that the damage is very, very long-lived, over almost permanent. Now, the removal of substrate is only one of the effects. The mining activity resuspends sediments from the seafloor in the nodule areas, and those sediments have toxic metals associated with them, some radioactivity, so that introduces that into the water when it was otherwise buried. There's a lot of noise and light and vibration associated with mining that's not natural down there in the deep sea, and that we don't know all the effects, but it certainly will deter or affect the movements of fish and marine mammal migrations and other organisms. The sediments, plumes, not only resuspended, but there's something called return water, where the ore is lifted to the ship and separated, and then the water is put back down into the deep ocean and full of, again, suspended material. And that also has the opportunity to affect all the plankton and fish that live in the water column. So, there have been no large-scale studies of the impacts, but there's been modeling of the movement of the sediment plumes. There's been some lab experiments where sponges and other animals are exposed to suspended sediments from both from the nodule zones, but also suspended material from massive sulfides. And often it's very toxic with very damaging effects. The sediments can smother the animals in many cases.
I don't mean to sound flip, but okay. So these animals that are potentially affected by this activity are at risk, or are potentially at risk. What is the extrapolation of risk as it relates to human beings in that regard?
Well, it's a great question. I mean, we tend to perceive everything as if it's beneficial to us, then it's worth saving. We're just beginning to understand how deep ecosystems function, but we know the ocean is fully connected, and it plays really important roles in carbon sequestration to keep our climate stable, plays important roles in regenerating nutrients that allow the ocean to be productive and fuel the fisheries that we rely on. We are beginning to get drugs and pharmaceuticals from the sponges and different kinds of invertebrates that live down in the deep sea. They have anti-cancer properties and antimicrobial properties. We just barely have begun to discover those, honestly. And then, it is biodiversity. It's some of the ocean's highest biodiversity. And I would say, since the large majority of the species have yet to even be found and discovered, there are functions and properties that we don't know about, right? We have found that deep sea animals have amazing adaptations to extreme conditions and amazing properties, and their enzymes can do things that, terrestrial enzymes can't do. So we've sometimes put them to use as industrial agents, or scrubbing CO2, or artificial blood templates, or artificial bone templates. There's all different possible human uses of the deep ocean. And I would say In many ways, the resources down there, because it is such a pristine and unexplored environment, it really belongs to future generations. That we're not going to be the ones to discover it all.
Yeah. So then, how do you respond to proponents of this activity who the questionable economics aside, the viability of making profit from this process? How do you respond to their assertion that you can do this in a proper way and keep the disruption of the ecosystem to a minimum?
I would say that's not true. Um, it's not possible to restore the deep sea like you can restore mining areas on land. I mean, I don't know how effective land restoration is, but with deep sea animals literally living for hundreds to thousands of years, we don't have the opportunity to restore. So we have to decide whether we want to give up basically parts of the seafloor and its associated biodiversity. We discovered, even in the nodule zones, which are very extensive and they extend off Mexico, it extends for thousands of miles, literally like the width of the United States, that the species aren't continuous. They have smaller ranges. And so when you mine a large area, you run the risk of creating extinctions, probably of things that we haven't even discovered yet. I don't think it's possible to mine in a sustainable way. You sometimes hear of companies arguing they are going to do sustainable seabed mining, but it's an inherently very, very destructive process. We might decide as a society sometime in the future that we want to give up parts of the bottom of the ocean and marine life because we desperately need it. But I don't think we're there yet. I don't think we desperately need it. There are reserves of nickel and cobalt on land that are untapped. They're much bigger than people would, lead us to believe. So, yeah, that's what I think.
I'm curious, how does one become a marine biologist? What persuaded you to devote your life's work to this?
Well, I grew up in Los Angeles, not too far from the ocean, and I spent a lot of time there as a kid. And then I was so lucky to have a National Science Foundation's high school student summer program at Humboldt State College. And I was 16. I went off and spent the summer there studying marine biology and oceanography and math. And I really fell in love with the ocean. And I had a bunch of great biology teachers in middle school and high school. So those kinds of things make a huge difference.
So how much of your time today is devoted to issues associated with deep seabed mining?
I would say the broader theme of translating deep sea science to policy making, I spend a lot of time on. I've sort of shifted my career in that direction. I do a lot of work on climate change. So I would say seabed mining isn't my primary focus at this point, although I end up doing a number of interviews. And we just sent in an article comparing seabed mining to marine carbon dioxide removal, because from a deep sea perspective, there are many similarities. But seabed mining is an important issue, and it's, of course, gained in importance as we come closer and closer to mining becoming a reality. So I would say, I don't know what percent of my time, maybe 10%.
But you do spend a fair amount of time, on the policy side. So how adequate, in your opinion, is the current regulatory framework when it comes to the potential of widespread seabed mining?
Well, okay, there are two regimes. The international regime, which is managed by the International Seabed Authority, and then each country would manage mining, seabed mining in its own waters. It's important to realize that no deep seabed mining has taken place anywhere, to my knowledge. The international regime, it's a little bit controversial, but it was the result of the UNCLOS, the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, and it created the International Seabed Authority in order to manage minerals mining in the area, which is the international seafloor. They call it the area. But also, it gave the ISA, the International Seabed Authority, the mandate to protect the marine environment from the effects of mining. And many people feel that those two mandates are conflicting, that the same organization can't be expected to both manage a highly destructive practice and to protect the environment from that highly destructive practice. The ISA is in the process of developing its regulations, or what's called the mining code right now. It's been going on fairly intensively for the last couple of years. And they are developing environmental regulations, at the same time that they're developing the financial code and the compliance regulations and the monitoring and insurance and so on. So it's really a very complex thing. They don't have a whole lot of environmental expertise in that organization. And I think the reality of mining is that it's so remote, it will be very hard to monitor and actually keep track of what's happening out there.
Yeah. So, what enforcement capabilities would the ISA have if hypothetically a nation state or a corporate entity decided to just launch, a major mining effort?
Well, the way the system works now is that only the states, that is the nations, can get mining contracts from the International Seabed Authority. They work with companies, mining companies, to actually would work to do the mining. That not every country has signed and ratified the Law of the Sea, and you have to have ratified to be able to get one of these contracts. So the United States, for example, has not ratified the Law of the Sea and can't, under that international regime, can't obtain an exploration or exploitation contract. I suppose a mining company could unilaterally go out, but there is no enforcement. The ISA doesn't have a fleet of ships or anything else. They would be putting inspectors on the mining vessels of whatever countries had exploitation contracts.
But what would be the what would be the implications? What would be the consequences of noncompliance, hypothetically?
Well, I think the most difficult thing is to know whether there is compliance. The ISA is in the process of establishing thresholds and defining serious harm, things that would stop mining in its tracks, if something were to happen. But I don't know very much about the regime and how they can actually enforce it. And they're still making the regulations to do that.
And where does that stand? How long do you think it's going to take before, I'm not sure codification is the right term, but how long before they have in place definitive regulations that will say when and where mining can occur and to what extent and things of that nature?
Well, I think the ISA itself, the Secretariat, would like to have everything done in less than a year, ideally this year. They have moved from holding 2 meetings a year to 3. And I know, have you heard of the 2-year rule?
I think so, yes.
By Nauru. That is a little known rule in the Law of the Sea that says that any company can, or any state can, provide notification that they intend to mine, and the ISA has 2 years to complete the formulation of the regulations. And if they haven't done it after 2 years, that company can still submit an exploitation contract application. That 2-year rule was triggered more than 2 years ago by Nauru and the metals company, which works with them. And those 2 years came and went, and the metals company has said they plan to submit an application by the end of this year, 2024. Whether they actually do it or not, I don't know. The regulations and the mining code is so complex, and I feel like there's still many parts of it that aren't resolved, but they've been moving along at a fairly rapid clip. So they might actually finish by the end of this year, the October meeting. They have a July meeting and then an October meeting, or maybe they would finish early next year. However, there is a movement afoot for a moratorium, a 10-year moratorium in many cases, to just halt and gather more information so that more effective regulations can be made, and maybe more effective decisions about seabed mining can be made. And there's 25 states that have signed on to that moratorium so far. I think that's the number. And then quite a lot of companies also have vowed not to source minerals from the deep sea. There's some car companies and some other big companies like Google, I think.
And where does the United States, writ large, fit in to all of this in terms of, participation in any sort of moratorium or helping form, the regulatory frameworks that would limit seabed mining?
Well, because the United States has not ratified UNCLOS, we don't have a vote at the International Seabed Authority. We're not technically a party to that. But they send an observer to every meeting, usually more than one, and they do weigh in the plenaries. They have stated their strong feeling that protection of the marine environment needs priority, but the United States hasn't indicated any interest in joining a moratorium, as far as I know, or any kind of ban on mining. France is the one country that's come out for banning deep seabed mining completely. And so and also, I don't know if you heard a few weeks ago, the United States ratification of UNCLOS was brought forward again to the Congress, and they declined to do it. But I heard it covered in the media as a mining treaty. It is not a mining treaty. A lot of that treaty is about protection of the marine environment. But it seems that at least some interests would like the U.S. to ratify UNCLOS so that the U.S. can get mining contracts. And it's been argued that the U.S. should secure its own source of minerals, of rare minerals. And so there's a lot of geopolitical interest associated with seabed mining. I mean, and it's partly because China has certainly the market on rare earth metals, but also, some others, and some of them come from the Congo and so on. So I think the Western countries would like to have their own source. It's one of the reasons Norway has proposed to open mining in its own national waters.
And so, but you don't necessarily require any sort of permission from any sort of international body if your ambition is to do that within your own territorial waters, right?
No, you just have to meet your own nation. Well, I guess it's a little more complicated than that. So I would say yes for the United States. The United States, if there's minerals mining, it will be regulated by BOEM, the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management. But for a country that has ratified UNCLOS, which is 160 some, maybe
168, I believe.
Okay. For those countries, the way the law is written is that once the mining code is developed for international waters, each of those countries is supposed to have regulations that are at least as strict as the international regulations. Now, whether anybody's going to enforce that, to me, it seems unlikely, but I think it's important.
Why hasn't the United States become a signatory to UNCLOS?
I am not an expert, and so I'm not sure I know the whole story. I've always felt like the United States doesn't like people telling them what to do. And there are a lot of regulations about creating resources as the common heritage of mankind and requiring benefit sharing and so on for those resources in UNCLOS. But I think that there's some other history that involves fisheries and some other things. I don't think I'm really qualified to answer that question, especially now. I don't know why.
Understand. So, not to get too cheesy here, but I mean, the oceans of the earth can't speak for themselves. I think that ultimately is, as to their welfare, short or long term, that ultimately, that responsibility, I think, falls to experts like you and other scientists. But I do believe that the oceans deserve a last word here. So, what do you think they would say? What do you think the oceans would say about whether they approved or disapproved of extracting nodules from the substrate of the ocean floor?
Well, if I was the ocean, or if I were a species in the ocean, I would say, what right does one species have on this planet to cause deterioration of the environment in a way that affects all other species? The ocean cannot speak for itself. I think basically, if we damage it and its functions, and we're doing that, we haven't done any mining yet, but we have done other things to damage the ocean, and it all comes back to us, right? It's going to affect our ability to live on this planet. We rely so intensively for, we are a water planet. We need a healthy ocean for all the processes and cycles on this planet to function properly. And if we damage that, it's ourselves that, will suffer, but also all the other millions of species on this planet.
Understood. Dr. Levin, thank you so much. I really, really greatly appreciate your insights and your time.
Sure. Thank you. My pleasure.
Lisa, you are a font of information. Thank you so much for helping us understand the details and the difficulties in making the correct decision regarding maintaining the CCZ for, as ISA dictates, the good of all mankind. And Dave, thanks as always for facilitating such an eye-opening conversation. And thanks to all of you in the audience for joining us today at the St. Helena Forum. This was the second part in a three-part series of interviews on the subject of deep sea mining. The third and final presentation in the series will be with James McFarland, the former head of environmental monitoring at the Seabed Authority, and impossible to imagine anybody better at helping us navigate the murky waters of the ISA. All three interviews are available now at shforum.org. And now, as we say goodbye, we'd like to thank the following people for their generosity in making the St. Helena Forum and its continuing programs possible.